Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal under the soft golden glow of the late afternoon sun that bathed the Metro Court terrace in warmth and serenity. Carly sat beside Jack Brennan with her legs dipped in the cool, still water of the pool. Everything about the moment felt idyllic, the delicate sparkle of champagne in her glass, the soft smile on her lips, and the comforting weight of a man's presence next to her who seemed to speak of futures filled with love, stability, and peace. To Carly, this felt like the universe finally offering a reprieve. After years of loss, betrayal, and constant battles to protect her family, this moment, and the man who shared it with her, appeared to be her long-awaited reward. Brennan had the air of a perfect partner, charming yet grounded, intelligent yet gentle, supportive yet respectful of her strength. He was, at least on the surface, everything she thought she needed. But buried beneath that surface was something darker. A precise, calculated deception hiding in plain sight, and a plan quietly unfolding that would shatter every illusion Carly held about love, loyalty, and safety. Brennan's proposal, cloaked in romance and sincerity, was not born out of love, but out of fear, a fear that the carefully constructed web of lies he had spun around Carly's daughter, Josslyn, was beginning to unravel. Not long before that afternoon at the pool, Brennan had recruited Josslyn into the secretive and dangerous world of WSB espionage. The timing had been insidious. Joss, still reeling from the violent death of Dex, was emotionally vulnerable, her sense of justice inflamed and her grief unresolved. Brennan saw an opportunity and inserted himself into that wound. He fed her false leads that pointed to Cyrus Renault, a known criminal who, conveniently, had the blood of Dex already rumored on his hands. Joss, desperate for closure and emboldened by the misguided promise of justice, pursued Cyrus. Their confrontation turned fatal. In a moment of fear and adrenaline, Joss shot Cyrus in what she believed was self-defense. Rather than calling the police or offering her protection through legal channels, Brennan concealed the killing. He wrapped Joss in layers of justification, convincing her that her actions had been not only necessary but righteous. He cast her as a crusader, a protector of the innocent, someone born to deliver justice where the system had failed. He then positioned WSB as the ideal outlet for that fire inside her, reinforcing the idea that she belonged in that world, that her pain gave her purpose. What Joss couldn't see, and what Brennan never allowed her to question, was how thoroughly he had manipulated her into becoming both weapon and pawn in his larger game. Unbeknownst to Carly, the man who toasted her by the pool was the same man who had transformed her daughter into a killer under the guise of righteousness. While Brennan planned to secure Carly's trust through a sudden and passionate engagement, trouble was already brewing elsewhere. Dante and Anna, both seasoned in the world of intelligence, began to notice inconsistencies. Security footage from the airport exposed Joss and Vaughn executing what was clearly a coordinated surveillance drop, a tracker placed in the courier bag of Professor Henry Dalton. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared like a random farewell, but to them, the staged interaction between Joss and Vaughn screamed of covert planning. The mission, it turned out, had been assigned by Brennan himself. Yet another layer of the secret he desperately hoped to bury under vows and wedding rings. Carly remained oblivious, enraptured by the whirlwind of romance. Brennan proposed with flair, offering promises of lifelong devotion and a shared future. And Carly, eager to finally lay her burdens down beside someone she believed she could trust, said yes. Plans moved quickly. The wedding was elegant, intimate, and breathtaking. The white dress, the gilded invitations, the flickering candles illuminating a garden at twilight. Everyone in Port Charles saw it as a fresh start for a woman who had endured so much. But in truth, the ceremony was little more than a gilded trap. For Brennan, it was a way to lock Carly in place before she could uncover the truth. With a wedding band on her finger and her name tied to his, he believed she would be far less likely to turn against him when the inevitable storm broke. It was Anna who planted the seed of doubt. In a casual conversation, she mentioned Josslyn's obsession with exposing Cyrus and how it had become more than just grief, it had become fixation. Carly felt a strange chill crawl down her spine. Joss had been distant lately, her answers short, her moods erratic. And Brennan, though always patient, seemed to expertly deflect any time Carly asked about Joss's whereabouts or her new ambitions. The pieces didn't quite fit. The smiles began to feel rehearsed. The reassurances began to feel pre-written. Carly didn't confront anyone immediately. She simply watched. She listened. She remembered. Eventually, her quiet investigation led her to the footage, grainy, time-stamped, but undeniable. In it, Josslyn could be seen covertly slipping a tracking device into a woman's purse while Vaughn created a distraction. Carly's breath caught as realization bloomed into horror. This wasn't a one-time error. This was deliberate. This was methodical. And as she replayed the clip, again and again, the truth settled like ice in her blood. Brennan had orchestrated all of this. He had manipulated her daughter into taking a life, steered her down a perilous path, and then tried to secure Carly's silence and complicity through a proposal wrapped in love but soaked in lies. He had used Joss as a tool, and Carly as a shield. The betrayal was total, unforgivable. But Carly didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't cry. Instead, she transformed. The heartbreak calcified into resolve. The woman who once sought peace through love now prepared for war through silence. She couldn't allow Brennan to continue playing God with her daughter's life. And she couldn't afford the risk of exposing him publicly, not while WSB still had eyes and ears everywhere. There was only one solution left, and it required precision, restraint, and a kind of cold courage she never thought she would need again. Brennan never saw it coming. His confidence was his downfall, his belief that the ring had bought him eternal protection. But Carly, armed with truth and fury, was patient. She chose her moment, quiet, clean, and final. When Brennan vanished, no one questioned her. They pitied her. They assumed he had run from his past, or from something bigger than love. WSB filed a missing persons report. No body was ever recovered. And Carly? She resumed her life, stronger, quieter, sharper. Behind her eyes lived a permanent shadow, a reminder of the cost she had paid to protect her daughter. And in the silence of her nights, when the city slept and the wind whispered through the trees outside Metro Court, Carly would stand at the window, remembering how quickly champagne turns bitter, and how the most beautiful lies always come dressed in tuxedos and diamond rings. Carly's fury did not explode in the form of screaming, broken dishes, or floods of tears. It didn't erupt like a thunderstorm but simmered quietly like a slow, icy burn, quiet, controlled, and terrifyingly focused. It was the kind of rage born not from sudden betrayal, but from the careful piecing together of a monstrous truth. Every warning she had once dismissed, every concerned glance or hushed caution from those who had doubted Brennan, now came crashing back like echoes in a dark, empty room. They had all been right, and she had been wrong, dangerously wrong. But it was too late for regret. Too late to simply walk away. Because Josslyn was already bound to WSB through the lies Brennan had sown into her grief and justice-hungry spirit. Because Carly, by every legal and symbolic measure, was now his wife. She had taken his last name. She had worn the ring. She had spoken vows to a man who had used her daughter as a weapon. And that, to Carly Spencer, was unforgivable. But Carly had never been a woman who stayed broken. She was forged in fire long before Brennan ever came into her life, and betrayal was not new to her, but this one was different. This wasn't about her heart. This was about her child. And when it came to her children, Carly didn't just fight, she annihilated. So she began to plan, not from a place of emotional chaos, but with the precision of someone who knew there would be no second chance. Every move had to be flawless. There would be no outbursts, no slip-ups, no one to confide in. Brennan had buried his knife deep into her life, and if she was going to remove it, she would do it in such a way that he wouldn't even realize it until the final breath left his body. The wedding day passed without a hitch. To the outside world, it was a vision of perfection, a union of two powerful, seasoned souls finding love in the aftermath of chaos. Carly glowed in her gown, shaking hands with old friends, dancing under the soft light of the reception tent, and smiling for photos with Brennan, who looked every bit the devoted husband. They shared their first dance to a classic ballad, laughed over shared memories, and cut the three-tiered cake like any blissful couple would. But beneath the soft fabric of her white dress, Carly's resolve was hard as stone. She moved through the day like an actress, masking every hint of her knowledge with the grace and ease of someone who had spent years surviving the impossible. No one noticed anything amiss. Not Michael. Not Joss. Not even Anna, who prided herself on sensing when something wasn't right. Everyone believed Carly had finally found peace. That she had opened her heart to someone worthy. But what they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that Carly had already decided Brennan wouldn't survive their marriage. And the first night of their life together would be his last. That night, after the final guest had left and the laughter of the party had faded into the silence of early morning, Brennan disappeared. Vanished without a trace. One moment he was standing on the hotel balcony, admiring the moonlit view with a drink in his hand, and the next, he was gone. There were no witnesses. No security footage. No signs of struggle. The room was clean, untouched, eerily quiet. His clothes, his wallet, his phone, all left behind as if he had simply evaporated. The staff at Metro Court, trained and discreet, assumed he had stepped out for a walk or a meeting. But when he never returned, the questions began. Calls from WSB agents went unanswered. His secure communications went dark. Internal trackers linked to his credentials stopped transmitting. At first, his colleagues believed he had been summoned to an urgent operation. Such sudden disappearances were not unheard of in their line of work. But as hours turned into days, and days into weeks, even the agency began to suspect something had gone wrong. Anna, increasingly uneasy, tried to trace his last known contacts, but even she could not explain the silence. Rumors began to swirl. Brennan had gone rogue. Brennan had been eliminated by a foreign threat. Brennan had been exposed and had fled before facing accountability. Port Charles, ever hungry for whispers and scandal, fed on these theories. But there was only one person who knew the truth. Carly. She moved through the days that followed with practiced calm. She expressed concern in public, offered cooperation to investigators, and played the grieving wife with haunting perfection. In private, she remained composed, serene, untouchable. When questioned by those closest to her, she claimed not to know where Brennan had gone, only that she hoped he would return safe. Joss, too busy with her own missions and still unaware of the full extent of Brennan's manipulation, accepted her mother's sorrow at face value. But Carly held her secret in silence, locked behind a wall of steel resolve. No one could ever prove what happened. No body was ever found. No blood. No evidence. Brennan had simply ceased to exist. But deep down, Carly knew justice had been served, not the kind dispensed in courtrooms or intelligence reports, but the kind a mother delivers when every system around her fails to protect her child. Brennan had taken too much, twisted too many lives, and underestimated the one person who could destroy him without ever lifting a weapon, the woman he had tried to control. In his arrogance, he forgot that Carly Spencer had survived more than most men could imagine. And she had never done so by playing fair. And so, she stood alone on the rooftop of Metro Court one night, the city lights flickering beneath her like stars caught in a restless dream. The wind tugged at her hair as she looked out into the dark, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph in her face, no relief. Just silence, the kind of silence that follows storms too violent for words. And in that silence, Carly knew that from this point forward, she would never allow herself to be fooled again. Because the next person who tried to hurt her daughter would not vanish quietly. They would burn. Brennan's body was never found. No grave, no casket, no obituary. His name faded into whispers and unanswered questions, swallowed by a storm of speculation that eventually grew stale with time. There was no funeral, no eulogy spoken by friends or colleagues, no carefully chosen words of remembrance etched into stone. Instead, there was only a quiet vacancy, an unexplained absence that lingered like smoke in the air. And high above it all, on the rooftop of Metro Court, Carly stood alone, motionless, statuesque, staring down at the city that had borne witness to her life's greatest triumphs and deepest tragedies. The skyline glittered under the weight of dusk, the hum of distant traffic murmuring like a lullaby beneath her feet. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She simply exhaled a long, weary breath, not from guilt, but from release. Because something inside her had died the night Brennan vanished, not her conscience, but a sliver of her humanity, the final thread of mercy she had once reserved for men who claimed to love her. To the world, his disappearance remained an enigma. To Carly, it was justice. Not poetic justice, not institutional justice, but the kind forged in fire, a mother's justice. Brennan had crossed a sacred line when he manipulated Josslyn, when he used her pain and grief to bend her into something she was never meant to become. He hadn't just betrayed Carly's trust. He had weaponized her child's soul for his own ambitions, pushing her into a dangerous life built on secrets and lies. Carly understood in her bones that no apology, no confession, no punishment from any authority would be enough. He had to disappear. He had to be erased, quietly, permanently, without the satisfaction of closure. It wasn't murder. It was protection. It was balance restored. In her eyes, it was the only rational response when the system failed, when the law could not reach the shadows where men like Brennan thrived. And so, Carly moved forward. She returned to her routines with practiced precision, every inch the woman the world expected her to be. At Metro Court, she was once again the poised, commanding figure behind every major decision, greeting high-profile guests with a warm smile and offering interviews to local press about her vision for the hotel's future. She attended charity galas in designer gowns, toasted at fundraising events, and laughed politely at cocktail parties. To outsiders, she seemed untouched by the chaos that had briefly darkened her life, resilient, graceful, perhaps even lucky. But beneath the flawless exterior was something colder, sharper, and irrevocably altered. The truth was that Brennan had left more than scars. He had carved a deep wound into the very fabric of her soul. Not because she had loved him, but because she had allowed him in, had trusted him with the fragile hope that perhaps, just once, someone could offer her something real without strings. That hope had been poisoned, and in its place grew a dark awareness, the knowledge that love, in her world, was often just the bait. And now, Carly smiled not because she felt joy, but because the world expected it. She laughed not from amusement, but from strategy. Her days became performances, each carefully choreographed to hide the steel beneath her skin. But the darkness didn't consume her. It refined her. Carly had always been strong. But now, she was something else entirely, something colder, clearer, and infinitely more dangerous. She no longer lived in the illusion that truth could protect those she loved. She had learned that survival sometimes meant becoming the monster before the monster found you. And if the world still harbored men like Brennan, men who smiled with charm while leading innocence into ruin, then Carly would not hesitate. If it came down to it again, she would do whatever it took, however dark, however final, to shield the people she loved from being used as pawns in someone else's game. She carried the burden of what she had done like an invisible scar, not worn as a trophy, but remembered like a vow. A vow that no one would ever again use her family as leverage. A vow that if anyone dared, they would vanish just as silently as the last man who tried. Her love for Josslyn remained the truest part of her, and it was that love, pure, unshakable, and fiercely protective, that now fueled the quiet storm inside her. And so, Carly lived. Not as a victim. Not even as a survivor. but as a woman reborn through fire and shadow, a sentinel cloaked in silk, whose smile could disarm and whose silence could sentence. Metro Court thrived. Port Charles continued its dance of danger and drama. But high above it all, Carly remained, watching, waiting, and never again unaware. Because the next man who thought he could break her would not simply disappear. He would be forgotten. And in the end, as the seasons shifted and life in Port Charles resumed its relentless rhythm, Carly stood alone yet unshaken, a woman who had faced the unthinkable and emerged not hollow, but transformed. The shadows that once threatened to consume her had instead become her armor. The pain of betrayal, the weight of secrecy, and the finality of Brennan's disappearance had not broken her. They had forged her into something rarer, something untouchable, a woman who understood the price of peace and was willing to pay it in full. No one would ever truly know what she had done, nor would they ever grasp the depths of what she had protected. She bore the silence not as a burden, but as a shield. The rooftop where she had once stood in mourning became a place of quiet reflection, where the lights of the city below reminded her that the world never stops, and neither would she. Carly Spencer had not just survived. She had transcended. No longer the woman who once sought comfort in promises, she was now the keeper of her own truth, the guardian of her bloodline, and the quiet executor of justice when the world refused to deliver it. If others still whispered Brennan's name, Carly let them. The unanswered questions, the lingering rumors, they no longer mattered. What mattered was that Josslyn was safe. That the danger had passed. That she could sleep at night knowing the monster had been neutralized not by law, but by a mother's unshakable will. And if darkness ever dared return to her doorstep, Carly would meet it not with fear, but with fire. Because now, she understood something vital. Justice was not always found in courtrooms or carried out by institutions.